This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm NIXILIS, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Over the last couple of weeks, I've taken a look at the top 10 white and blue Planeswalkers, and today we're continuing with that theme with a look at black Planeswalkers. Planeswalkers are, of course, one of the most powerful card types in the entire game, mostly because you only pay a one-time mana investment, and then you get a card that can do a thing every single turn without paying any more mana, and the value they give you just keeps on growing. If you play a Planeswalker and your opponent can't deal with it, you're going to be winning the game more often than not. To be eligible for this list, a card had to be a mono-black Planeswalker. 24 cards qualified for this list, and in this video we're going to take a look at the 10 black Planeswalkers that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A top 8 at a Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, Mythic Invitational, Legacy, or Vintage Championship is worth 2 points, and a top 8 at a Magic Fest Grand Prix is worth 1 point. Before we move on to number 10, I want to tell you about this video's special sponsor, Into the AM. They're an apparel company that sells all kinds of awesome stuff, including graphic tees like the one I'm wearing right now. Their shirts have really neat designs, like this one called Digital Space. I'm from the southwestern United States, and I sometimes miss seeing the sunsets I used to see there, and this shirt is like a desert sunset. You know, if that sunset were in Tron, and that's a pretty cool visual. In addition to having cool and original designs like this one, their shirts are also a great fit. I'm 6'3" and 260 pounds, and that usually means I need to buy big and tall clothing, but this is just a double XL and it fits me great. They have a wide range of sizes too, from small to 4XL. Right now, Into the AM is doing a promotion where you can get 3 graphic tees for $60. In addition to that, if you use my special link, which you should see on screen, and you'll also be able to find in the description, you'll get an additional 10% off. If you're looking for cool graphic tees or other great apparel, you should definitely check them out. Alright, let's get to the top 10. At number 10, it is Liliana, Heretical Healer. It probably doesn't surprise anyone that we're going to see a lot of Liliana on this list, so it is nice to start the top 10 with this card, which depicts Liliana before she ever became a Planeswalker. In Magic Origins, there was a whole cycle of double-faced creatures that transformed into Planeswalkers, and this is Liliana's card in that cycle. As a creature, this Liliana is a 3-mana 2/3 with lifelink, which is not a great deal, but the good news is that she's pretty easy to transform. You just have to have a creature die, and when that happens, she not only transforms into Liliana Defiant Necromancer, she also makes a 2/2 zombie, which is pretty nice because it makes sure there's at least one body to protect your new Planeswalker. Liliana often likes reanimating things and making people discard cards, and that's certainly the case here. Her +2 is a symmetrical discard effect, her -X is a reanimation effect, and her ultimate gives you an emblem that allows you to gain control of any creature that dies, which is obviously pretty game-breaking. This Liliana gained all of her points in the standard of 2016 and Golgari Aristocrats decks. These decks had plenty of free and repeatable sacrifice effects and ways to take advantage of them, so Liliana was right at home, since the deck could very easily play her and immediately transform her, and then they could usually also make use of her zombie token after that. She doesn't have any points since 2016, and it wouldn't be very hard for a future Planeswalker to knock her off of this list. At number 9, it is DAVRIEL, Rogue SHADOWMAGE. DAVRIEL is an uncommon War of the Spark Planeswalker, which makes him a bit different from what we usually see on Planeswalkers. For one thing, he's only got one loyalty ability and has no way to increase his loyalty, and for another, he has a static ability. War of the Spark was the first set to introduce static abilities for Planeswalkers, and all 36 of them in the set had them. This all means that while most Planeswalkers can grind out impressive advantages with their loyalty abilities and eventually use an ultimate, DAVRIEL can't. However, his one loyalty ability and his static ability combo quite well together. DAVRIEL punishes your opponent for not having enough cards in hand, and his ability lets you make them discard cards. While in Standard, he was a sideboard card that Golgari aggro decks would bring in against opponents where the disruption was powerful, and in Pioneer he's gained some points in the sideboards of mono-black decks. DAVRIEL has a small chance to gain more points in the future, though he doesn't have any since 2019. At number 8, it is SORIN, IMPERIOUS BLOODLORD. This version of SORIN is all about Vampire Tribal. You can use this first +1 on any creature, but just giving Death Touch and Lifelink to a creature, while kind of nice, isn't exactly incredible. If you target a vampire, though, you get a +1/+1 counter, and that makes a big difference, and his other 2 loyalty abilities are completely blank if you don't have vampires. His other +1 lets you sacrifice a vampire to lightning helix something, and his -3 lets you put a vampire directly on the battlefield from your hand. Importantly, his -3 can be used right away since he starts with 4 loyalty. Unsurprisingly, SORIN found all of his success in decks with lots of vampires in both Standard and Pioneer. SORIN had the bad luck of only being in Standard at the same time as the Ixalan block vampires very briefly, and that really suppressed his score. During the brief time the two overlapped, vampire decks were pretty scary in Standard though. SORIN doesn't have any points since 2020, and vampire decks haven't been a big force in Pioneer either for a while, but I could see him gaining more points in the future, especially if we see another vampire-heavy set. He gives you some very powerful effects if your deck is full of vampires. At number 7, it's another SORIN. The very first one we ever saw, in fact, SORIN MARKOV. 6 mana is a lot, and triple black isn't always easy either, but SORIN is pretty strong. He can come down and tick up to 6 loyalty while killing a small creature and gaining you life. The +1 can hit players too, which can be pretty nice. Or he can come down and immediately use his -3 to make an opposing player's life total 10. That ability isn't always relevant, but it can alter the game in some situations. And he has a pretty sweet ultimate that lets you mind slavery your opponent. Taking over an opponent's turn is one of the most powerful things you can do in Magic, and most of the time, your opponent just can't recover. You can fire off their removal on their own stuff and attack into your blockers, which is just nasty. He can get to 8 loyalty pretty quickly too to use that ability since he has a +2. Due to his high mana cost, SORIN is definitely a Planeswalker that is best suited to control decks, and that's where he's gained all of his points, in particular in standard blue-black and Grixis control decks. He doesn't have any points since 2012 though, and he's another Planeswalker who could easily be surpassed in the future. At number 6, it is Liliana, Death's Majesty. Liliana is a pretty big fan of zombies, and this one is more zombie-centric than most of her incarnations. Her +1 makes a zombie, which is nice. Anytime you can raise a Planeswalker's loyalty and create a body to protect them, it feels pretty good, and gives you a real shot at keeping them in play for a while. She also mills 2 cards from your library, and if you're in black, you can take advantage of that. And I mean, she can take advantage of it all on her own too, since she can reanimate a creature and make it a zombie with her -3. Sometimes if you have something particularly strong in your graveyard, just going for the reanimation right away makes the most sense. If you get to her -7, she then nukes all non-zombies, and chances are good that you have a few of them from her other 2 abilities, while your opponent probably doesn't have any. Liliana gained all of her points in Standard, in a pretty wide variety of decks, ranging from pure control decks to aggro decks like Orzhov Vehicles, and mid-range decks like Energy. She hasn't gained any points since rotating out of Standard, though she's high enough on the list that she may maintain a spot on it for a while. At number 5, it is Liliana, Dreadhorde General. Like DAVRIEL, this Liliana is a War of the Spark Planeswalker, which means she has a static ability. Unlike DAVRIEL, she is a mythic rare, so she comes with a wider array of abilities, and the total package here is pretty impressive. Her static ability draws you a card anytime one of your creatures dies, making any trade you make into a 2-for-1 and making any chump block you do much less of a chump block. Her +1 gives you a zombie to protect her, and the great thing is that her static ability doesn't say non-token, so those zombies dying to protect her will give you cards. Her -4 is a symmetrical double edict effect. While it is technically symmetrical, the fact that you get back 2 cards if you sacrifice your 2 creatures is nice because your opponent doesn't. Then, if you get to her ultimate, she makes your opponent lose most of their board. She gained all of her points in Standard. Like most 6-mana Planeswalkers, this Liliana was mostly played in control decks, though she did find her way into a Golgari aggro deck that top-8'd Mythic Championship 6 as well. So far, she hasn't put up any points outside of Standard, though she is seeing a bit of play in Historic, so perhaps she will add to her score in the future. At number 4, it is our 3rd consecutive Liliana, and this one is actually the first Liliana ever, Liliana Vess. Planeswalkers made their debut in 2007's Lorwyn, and Liliana was one of the 5 printed in the set. This very first Liliana does a very good job of representing what black is all about. Her +1 makes your opponent discard, her -2 lets you tutor a card to the top of your library, and her ultimate lets you reanimate all creatures from all graveyards. Like a lot of early Planeswalkers, Liliana Vess was reprinted a fair bit, including in Magic 2010, Magic 2011, and Magic 2015. This gave her legality in Standard for a pretty large span of time, and is part of what has allowed her to gain 44 points. Her first time through Standard, she was played in Elf and Fairy tribal decks, and later she was featured in Abzan, Sultai, and Blue-Black control decks. She also gained a couple of points in extended Deathcloud decks, which took advantage of the fact that Deathcloud didn't make you lose your Planeswalkers, So, you could basically nuke the whole board and hold on to your walkers like Liliana, who could eventually then reanimate everything that died. Like a lot of cards on this list though, she hasn't gained points in a while, but with her high score, she's not going anywhere anytime soon. At number 3, it is NIXILIS Reignited. Most of Ob's power is concentrated in his +1 and his -3. His ultimate isn't bad, but it can be pretty slow at closing out a game. Meanwhile, his +1 lets you draw cards at the cost of 1 life, and his -3 can kill any creature, no questions asked. Anytime a Planeswalker has a card draw ability and a removal ability, it tends to be pretty good, and NIXILIS Reignited is no exception to that. He gained all of his points in Standard, where he was pretty much a staple in black decks, whether they were aggro decks like Golgari Constrictor or mono black zombies, or abs and control decks. At number 2, it is Liliana the Last Hope. This Liliana packs a ton of power for only 3 mana. She has a +1 that lets you kill small creatures and weaken larger creatures until your next turn, and a -2 that lets you load up your graveyard and return a card to your hand. Funnily enough, her ultimate is actually kind of bad in most of the decks that have played her, since they don't tend to run many zombies, but it doesn't really matter when she has those other 2 effects. However, when she saw play in Standard, she did see play in zombie tribal decks as well as in the graveyard-based Golgari Delirium deck. In Pioneer, she's played in that format's version of Delirium too. In Modern, she has been played the most in Death Shadow and Jund decks, both of which have considerable graveyard synergy. She's also seen play in various Legacy decks that like having stuff in the graveyard, including Threshold, Death Shadow, and Grixis Control. She's even gained points in Vintage, Bug, mid-range decks. She is going to continue to gain points going forward, and it seems likely she'll be on this list for the foreseeable future. She even has at least an outside chance of passing the number 1 card on this list, which is Liliana of the Veil. So far, the number 1s on these Planeswalker lists haven't exactly been surprising. Like Liliana of the Last Hope, this Liliana gives you a ton of value on turn 3, and she is pretty hard to beat when she comes down that early. She can come into play, make your opponent sacrifice their only creature, and then start making players discard cards. Then, her ultimate can completely reshape the board, and she can get there surprisingly quickly. While she saw play in Jund decks in the Standard of her day, she only earned 35 points in that format. Modern is really where she's done the most work though. She's been a fixture there since the format began in 2011, and she's been a key card in modern Jund decks with some top 8s along the way in Gifts Control, Abzan, and Death Shadow. She's also seen some play in Legacy Threshold and Lands. She also has a single top 8 in Vintage, but it came back in 2017. She is going to continue to gain points, and it will be interesting to see in the long run whether Liliana the Last Hope ever passes Liliana of the Veil. Well, those are the 10 black Planeswalkers that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you want to own any of these awesome Planeswalkers, take a look at the description where you'll find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in this video. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you can stay aware of future content. If you want to catch up on the almost 400 MTG Top 10s I've already done, including more on Planeswalkers, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Lastly, if you like my content on this channel, consider subscribing to my other one, Need to Hone History, which looks at real-world history. Thanks for watching.